The Marinade.
There's no O in Marinade. Let's try it one more time. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
The Marinade.
Marinade.
Bone marinade. The
That's
Marinade.
The Marinade. With Jason Earl. What's up, y'all? Jason's Journey, the normally Patreon exclusive show where I talk about the moments that shape my creative life. It is an unscripted look into the making of the Marinade, and I thought this time what I'd do is put it out there to everybody, hopefully to hook you on the Patreon, which, by the way, you can join for just $2 a month. You get this, you get what we're getting down on my show with my great friend Peter Haraldson. You get the Inner Child, which is the show where I ask our guests kind of silly questions, favorite food and I don't know, dream car, silly stuff like that, where we get a little more lighthearted. And it's just fun, and you support the show. It's only $2 a month, y'all. So if you can swing it, we greatly appreciate it. But if not, totally understand. We're still grateful for everybody who continues to support the Marinade in free ways by following us and so forth. So what this is the reason why this is public right now and not just on Patreon is, after years of doing this show, I still learn stuff. So I'm completely self-made when it comes to podcasting, right? I started this thing, I had the idea in like 2015 or 16, I guess 2015, and then started working on learning about how podcasting, comes about, how you put it together, what resources you need, and that kind of stuff. I started saving up and acquiring equipment, and eventually launched in September of 2017, right? So kind of crazy that we're a good 6 years into episodes, and 7, almost 8 years, I guess, into this process starting. It's been such an incredible journey. And I was thinking about it last night. Somebody was talking about Larry Brown on Twitter, and I was just thinking about like when I got turned on to Larry Brown, and I don't remember who it was, but it was definitely a guest of the show. And then like maybe right after that, someone posted that they had not heard of Stephen Prigmore, our guest for episode 130. And anyway, I just was like kind of reflecting on how fortunate I am to have had so much support. But I was also thinking about little things that kind of drive me crazy. So like volume levels, when you don't know what you're doing, I mean, I kind of know now, right? But I'm not an audio engineer. I'm not trained at all in that kind of stuff. I'm not at all trained in production, audio production in any way. I've just watched videos and trial and error and things like that. And like, I feel like we sound pretty damn professional, but there are times when I listen to podcasts with a big budget, and I'm so jealous of them because it's like, it's a subtle difference, but it's a difference. So I was just kind of like doing some research and messing around with sort of like what happens when I export a file and why it sometimes sounds different from what I've recorded, right? Because I mean, I spend hours listening back, editing, recording the intros and outros, making sure everything sounds good, and it always sounds perfect on my end. And then when I release it, sometimes it sounds the same, and then sometimes it sounds a little bit different. So I was just trying to figure out like, what the fuck is that? Like, what is the issue there? And so I'm messing with a new setting. So that's why I decided to do this publicly, is that I'm going to kind of give you, this is part of Jason's journey, right? Is the technical side of it. Because again, I've always felt comfortable with the conversation. There are certainly moments where I get a little anxious or whatever, but I've never felt like I couldn't handle the interview part, if that makes sense. I do a ton of research. I come in ready, and almost to a person, 99%, 98, 99% of our guests are really forthcoming. Like they're grateful to be on the show. They've agreed for a reason. And they're typically people who, have done a fair amount of press. And so that makes a difference too. Cause they're comfortable, they've been interviewed. And because we come at it from a different angle, I think that most of our guests really appreciate that. They find it fresh. So, the interview part has never been an issue for me, but the production part, even though what we're doing isn't exactly like making a record, it's still like, there's a fair amount that goes into it. And once you get used to those things, once I kind of developed a routine, it isn't all that like taxing on me. But early on, not knowing what the fuck I was doing, it was incredibly taxing. Like, I can't tell you how many. I still have times. I mean, when I first started, like, it would take hours to do this show because I just had no idea what everything was, what all these buttons were, and which ones needed to be pressed and which ones didn't need to be pressed. And when we first started, I didn't even, so I have a Mac now, which has GarageBand on it, and GarageBand's pretty intuitive. But before, I had a free software called Audacity, and a lot of people still use it and like it. A lot of big name podcasts use it. I couldn't figure the fucking thing out. I felt like it was impossible. So, we've made these adjustments and changes over time, but I still don't totally know what I'm doing when it comes to that part of it. So it's kind of nice, right? It's like I can't get bored because I'm constantly learning, and I feel like what has happened is that these are transferable skills. In my day job, I'm a teacher, and having the ability to do like rudimentary editing, audio editing, has paid dividends in my classes. When I taught middle school, I'm teaching high school now, but when I taught middle school, I would like make up silly songs for things we were learning, and I could record them. Like one time I was a rapper called Chef Boyardee, and and I made a song about reading, and I bought a chef's hat, like recorded myself, in the chef's hat, and then I did the audio through GarageBand. So these are things that, like, before I did the show, I wouldn't have known, And then I also had I forget the character's name, but I had a character that was a folk singer, of course, and he had a song also about close reading, and it was just fun, But those kinds of things are things that I wouldn't have known how to do before the Marinade. So there are transferable skills that I'm learning that don't just benefit the show, but that are beneficial to other folks and to my life. And so as I'm messing with this, we'll see how it sounds. I also want to first of all say thank you to everybody who's listening, and then also just kind of do a quick rundown of what we've had going on. Last weekend, I went to Dunedin, Florida. So Dunedin, its black eye is that it's the birthplace and home of our whiny little emperor in the governor's mansion in Tallahassee. But otherwise, it's a pretty interesting place. It's the spring training home of the Toronto Blue Jays. So that's why I went over there. Not that I'm particularly a Blue Jays fan, but I love baseball and I love spring training. And I was talking to Glenn from the Raised by Whoops podcast, who graciously has had me on his show twice. And the second time, right before we started recording, he was asking me if I go to spring training. It was right when spring training started. And I realized, like, yeah, I used to go all the fucking time. I mean, it was like especially growing up here, and as a kid being obsessed with baseball. And then I think really what happened was COVID. I'm still at a place where I just don't leave the house very often. I've gotten back out into the world a little bit, probably more so than I want to, honestly, because I'm still very uncomfortable in crowds. I'm still very uncomfortable even in like the grocery store. I do it, but I don't want to be there. And part of that is just I've got a really sweet setup here, right? Like our house is very comfortable. I love being around Chris and our dogs. I just like being home. I got a big backyard. If I want to get outside, our neighborhood is quiet and beautiful, and there's a park down the street. I don't need to go anywhere. So, I'm all for adventures, but as far as like going to events, I do it because I love live music and I love live sports and I love live theater, but I'm still very uncomfortable. So I just hadn't gone to spring training in several years, and probably dating before COVID, really, because the Orlando area directly doesn't really have a team. The Braves used to be here. Somebody else used to play out at the Wide World of Sports at Disney. But you got to drive an hour from here, at least, right? So Lakeland should be an hour away. But in the last few years, for whatever reason, a ton of people have moved to Florida, and it, which blows my mind. We're looking to get out, but it's like an hour and a half to go, 56 miles or whatever. Traffic is just hellacious everywhere you go, and part of that is my own hang-ups about toll roads. I just think they're fucking crazy. It's just the wildest thing to me that we have to pay to travel places. To take our own cars places. I totally get paying for a train ticket, but I have to pay to take my car somewhere. It's horseshit. So I avoid toll roads, which of course adds some time, but going to Lakeland, it's not like that's not getting in the way. You got to go I-4, and if you're going I-4, you're stuck in traffic. So anyway, I had planned to go to Lakeland and spend a night, but it just like traffic was crazy and everything just like didn't line up. I couldn't find a campsite. Another thing I don't like paying for is lodging. Couldn't find a campsite, and so I was just like, forget it. I'm gonna stay here, and then I'll go to Dunedin the next day. So in Dunedin, I lucked out. My great friend Mark lives there. Grew up in Palm Harbor, right down the street. So he lives kind of between the two cities, and he has a gorgeous home that's a bike ride away from the Blue Jay Stadium. And he was out of town. He and his family were on vacation. So he was like, just, I'll leave you a key. Stay in the guest room, whatever, man. Help yourself to some wine. and I did. And it was awesome. It was just a nice getaway and an opportunity to just kind of relax. So at the end of that weekend, there was a festival in Tampa. So Dunedin is just west of Tampa. And this festival is baseball themed. So it's marrying like all my favorite things. It's music, and like the Ava Brothers were playing, and Group Love was playing, and Japanese breakfast. And without getting in the weeds about like how these things come about in terms of me covering them, the Marinade being involved with them, basically I thought I was approved for press access, and then I wasn't. Which was frustrating because that was going to be a centerpiece of my trip. But it all worked out because the person I really wanted to talk to at the festival was former Major League Baseball player, World Series champion, All-Star, Gold Glover, Bronson Arroyo, who played for my beloved Cincinnati Reds and for like 9 years of his 16-year career. And he has a record, right? So I was like, this is perfect. I get to talk to someone who was one of my favorite Reds and the Reds are my favorite team. Plus, I get to, talk about music and creativity. So the plan had originally been I was going to try to catch up with him at the festival. That fell through, but he and his publicist and all his people were so cool and so flexible that they were just like, just meet him at the place where he's staying. So I that night, Saturday night, I got to go to the spot where this really cool little home, like next to a park, which was on the water. And Bronson Arroyo and his band were just in there hanging out. So I just sat upstairs in a room with Bronson Arroyo and talked for an hour. And I don't know if I'm not right now doing justice to how exciting this was for me. Bronson's a little bit older than me, but we're of a similar generation. So it's not like I grew up, it's not like me interviewing Barry Larkin or someone who would be a childhood hero. I was in my 20s before he made it into the major leagues, and so I wasn't watching as much baseball then as I do now and as I did as a kid. And the reason why is because I was still kind of frankly bitter about the fact that my career had ended. I got cut my freshman year in college, and all I wanted to do was play baseball. That was my passion, that was my love. And so when it happened, I was devastated. I was devastated and did not handle it very well. I became very self-destructive. I really replaced baseball with drinking. I've talked about this before on the Raised by Whoops podcast, but I don't think I've ever said it here. Nobody really told me, right? Like, nobody said, hey man, this thing you've dedicated your life to, when it ends, there'll be a hole. And like, plenty of people said, hey, it's going to end at some point. I remember Brian Doyle, who's my cousin, I guess, kind of, but Brian was, he was a World Series champion with the Yankees, and he had a school called Doyle Baseball School. And so, like, he became a mentor for me when I was in middle and high school. And he said, he would always say, there's an end coming, and so play each game like it was your last. Kind of cliche, but also resonated with me. So I did. I really laid it all out there every single day. And what nobody said to me was, it's going to end, and then you're going to need to fill that emotional space with something else. And honestly, it wasn't until I was in law school in my late 20s that I first saw a therapist. And the therapist, was getting to know me. And I told her about the baseball thing, and she goes, well, what do you do? What do you do to fill that hole? And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, you spent the first 20 years of your life obsessed with this thing, and then it was just gone. So what do you do? And I was like, I guess I drink beer and go to concerts. I don't, what, lady? And finally, I unpacking all of that, realized, like, shit, I didn't have anything. I've since thankfully filled it with lots of different things, including this show and, my own music and writing and exercising in various ways. Like, there's a lot that now fills that void. But her point was extremely well taken, and I wish someone had, said that to me when I was younger. Whether I would have received it or not, I don't know. That's another thing. You can tell kids all kinds of stuff, and they may not be ready for it. So anyway, while I wasn't watching a ton of baseball in my 20s, I still was watching it. We used to play this, speaking of drinking, we used to play this game called Hit by Pitch in college. And we'd watch, it was a drinking game. We'd watch a baseball game, and then, like, every time there was a balk, you had to chug a beer or whatever, stupid college kid drinking stuff. But we watched a fair amount of baseball as a result. And And it was, it was still a big part of my life. Well, during that time, Bronson Arroyo was first with the Red Sox and then later with the Reds. And part of his time with the Reds was a little bit later when I did get into law school. And while law school is quite time consuming, it's still school. So, you kind of are making your own schedule to a large extent. And I had the MLB TV package and watched a lot of baseball. I doubt it exists anymore. I don't even remember what I called it, but I had a blog where I was going to comment on every Reds game. Like, that's where I got back into that, right? So when I get into something, my new thing is Major League Soccer. When I get into something, I tend to get kind of obsessive about it. So at that time, I was watching every Reds game and documenting it, like nerdily documenting it, And I think, looking back on it, I think in the back of my mind, I was starting to, not in the back of my mind, I knew I was starting, this is in Jacksonville. You've heard me say Jacksonville is where I learned to be a creative. I was starting to understand that I was a creative person and that I needed to write, that it was a part of me. And so, I was looking for every outlet I could find. I started a blog where I was writing about Florida. I was writing I had written a blog when I was in Holland that I don't know if still exists anywhere, but almost daily I was documenting like what was happening as I was kind of on my European adventure, working at the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, on the Association for Defense Counsel. So, I was starting to get it that, hey, I'm a creative person. I need this. This is how I'm filling that hole, even if I wasn't identifying it as filling the hole left by baseball. But I was also watching a lot of baseball. So, Bronson was, and a lot of this will come out in the episode, so I don't want to go too deep into it, but Bronson was a creative, and it was obvious he was. I didn't know he was a musician at the time. Maybe I did know, because he had a covers record he put out of 90s grunge songs, right after he won the World Series with the Red Sox. But he wasn't the biggest, fastest, strongest guy. He was big, fast, and strong. But, at the major league level, everybody is. And so, as a pitcher, he didn't throw as hard as everybody else, but he knew how to get guys out, and he did so in creative ways. He was a lot of fun to watch. And so he became one of my favorite Reds. This storied franchise that is the very first professional baseball team was the Cincinnati Red Stockings. And this is a team that I've rooted for since I was 6 or 7 and became conscious of baseball. My very first ever game was at the old Riverfront Stadium in Cincinnati. They played the Cubs. I've been a fan since I was a child. And he was one of my favorites after all those years. So to sit in that room and get to talk with him, he's also from Florida. So to sit in that room and get to talk with him at all was awesome. And then also we just, we talked baseball for sure, but we just talked so much about creativity. And he is a very thoughtful guy. He is, you can see that his brain is constantly spinning, right? It's like, those folks, you're in the room with them and it's just like, there's an energy about them where it feels like their brain's going a mile a minute. He's one of those guys. So it was a huge thrill for me to get to not only talk with this baseball player who I loved on the field, but then also to be able to connect. And it felt like we really connected. It was whatever maybe nervousness I might have about watching or talking with one of my favorite baseball players, was gone in seconds, because he was so welcoming. He was so cool. And immediately it just felt like an old friend. So I'm really, really excited for y'all to hear that episode. It was a nurturing weekend. It was really nice to get to just like spend some alone time, watch some baseball, which always fills my cup, talk with a former professional baseball player who's now a musician who, we talk about like, he's personal friends with Eddie Vedder. We talk about that. He told an amazing Eddie Vedder story. I can't wait for y'all to hear. We talked about like Joey Votto, who's another one of my favorite baseball players of all time, and his creative mind. And just so many great things that y'all are gonna really enjoy. But I think also what I want to say right now is I feel like one of the things I've tried so hard with is keeping our guest list diverse, and not necessarily just like racially diverse or like gender diverse, although those are considerations for sure, huge considerations. And I know I fall short of that goal a lot. I talk about that all the time. But also just like diverse in personality and background. I think this last run of shows, if you look at Stephen Prigmore, Sammy K, Marissa Armas, Mike Harmeyer, and Justin Wells. Just the last 5. Let's take the last 5 episodes that we've released. And then you've got Bronson Arroyo coming up, and you've got Lauren Morrow coming up. That's a really, those are all white folks, but that's a diverse group of people with diverse backgrounds and perspectives and interesting contrasts in their contributions, even though they're all kind of in the same world. Other than Bronson, you can pretty much lump most of those folks into a broad Americana blanket. I don't know if Sammy fits there or not. Who knows? He's his own guy. But he's such an interesting dude who has such a fascinating perspective on the world. And if you look at those 5, like I'm just really, really proud of what we've done. And I hope that I hope that you came to the show and the Marinade and Stephen Prigmore was new to you. Cool if you already knew him. That's awesome too. Or Sammy K. I hope you pick up a Sammy K record or grab Marissa Armas's book as a result of this. If you just come for the conversation, cool. If you just come for like the insight, cool. But I also hope that, as someone who makes stuff, and this is something Bronson and I talked about, as someone who makes stuff, I'm just grateful I get to make it. That being said, if people can support it financially, it makes a huge difference. Now, I don't do this for a living, so, I'd say buy Sammy's record before you contribute to my Patreon. But also, if you can contribute to my Patreon, it makes a big fucking difference. And I feel weird selling, myself or whatever sometimes, but that's an odd thing to say, right? Like, I'm making stuff. It matters to people. I should feel more comfortable saying, hey, if you can do it, throw me some cash, If you can't, that's cool too. Keep listening. It's free. But if you can, you'll get extra content like this. Jason's Journey. I love y'all. Until next time, go out and create something. Cheers, y'all.